And so I want to start off with a word that I'm going to throw up on the screen here. And, well, let's just see how it lands, all right? Addiction. All of us have some kind of experience with it, whether it's a personal experience, whether it's a family member, a friend, whether it's just, driving through some areas of towns. There's something that sticks with us. And I'm going to just go to a couple of definitions of what addiction means. This one's from the American Psychiatric Association. And it describes addiction this way: a brain disease that is manifested by compulsive substance use despite harmful consequence. And then we're going to go across the ocean to the UK and get their take on it. This is from the National Health Service in the UK. Not having control over doing, taking, or using something to the point where it could be harmful to you. So with those definitions in our minds, I have a very important question for us today. And it's simply this: what if we're addicted to busy? It's maybe one of those moments where I say, "Hi, my name is Mike." Right? Because it's one of those things that we sort of laugh it off, because we're like, yeah, but let's be honest. Even if we were addicted to busy, it's an addiction we're cheered for, right? I mean, you do it and people are like, man, I can always count on you, right? You're at the office and they keep putting more and more stuff on your desk, and it's because I can always count on you. And you're like, right? But it's like, okay, I got to do it. We're not only cheered for it, we're rewarded for it, right? It's like, man, great job. Did you do it? Oh, let's reward. You've accomplished the biggest sales. You've done all this kind of stuff. We get these rewards. We're appreciated for it. But it doesn't change the question or our own answers to that question. What if? What if we really are addicted to busy? And what if it's causing us to miss things we're not even aware we're missing? And before we get even more uncomfortable today, maybe it's a good moment to pray, all right? So I invite you to bow your heads. Let's pray one more time together, right? Lord, I just want to thank you as we start today for the gift of being uncomfortable. Because as much as I hate it, and I don't want to speak for everybody, I think a lot of us hate it, it is a gift that you've given us that causes us to do something to try to find a more comfortable spot. And maybe today you can help us get there, or at least to get a little more comfortable with this uncomfortable truth about a lot of us, and maybe a way out of all of this. So today, again, I thank you for this gift of this day to pause, to step away, and to give you some space in our lives that we don't normally give you, because there's so much else to do. So thank you for that. And so we just ask that you would use this moments we have together to use this old story from the life of Jesus and maybe help us to apply it to some new situations in our life. In your name, amen. Well, we've been talking about this whole idea of pausing, right? And here's the truth about this. Pausing can seem like a dumb idea, right? Because I know some of you have been thinking, last week we talked about this idea, this day was set apart by God to pause on, right? To take a break. And some of us have sort of got that as a rhythm of our life. Some of us are working on making the rhythm of life. Some of us are kind of trying to figure it all out. Some of us are like, there is no possible way I could do that. There's no possible way I could take it's hard enough for me to take an hour and a half off to show up in this space, but how could I take a whole 24-hour period off? And I understand there's a lot of challenges to that, a lot of getting your mind around it if it's not familiar to you. And even if it's familiar to you, sometimes making it work. And I know that pausing can seem like a dumb idea, especially when you just think about the pace of life. You may be thinking, I got this huge project, right? I mean, I got all these reports I got to get together. I got all these people I got to get stuff from in order to get this production. And it's due this week, and you're just scrambling. How could I pause in the midst of that, right? Or maybe you have relatives coming over, like tomorrow. And you're kind of scrambling in your head about, oh man, all the stuff I got to do, and all the stuff I got to get cleaned up around the house, so they think this is how my house always is, not like how it really is, right? Maybe it's you're scrambling this week, so everything's done so you can go on vacation, not actually work on vacation. And there's some great advice that has popped in from somebody that a lot of people in not just our nation, but in the world look up to. And they look up to him for one very simple reason. He's a rich guy. And he has developed his wealth by investing and buying and selling and do all this kind of stuff. But he's become this voice. A lot of people turn to him, right? In fact, he's called an oracle, which is this sort of almost a biblical sounding word, right? This oracle of, anybody know where it's from? Omaha. Omaha's the answer. Omaha. Nobody got that one either. All right, here we go. So from Warren Buffett, who's like one of the richest people in the world. He's a guy, I was listening to him have this talk that he did, and he said, listen, I can buy anything I want. Because he can. Literally, anything he wants, he can buy. Because he got all this money. But he says, you know what I cannot buy? Time. And here's this great phrase that stuck me when I heard it. He said, busy is the new stupid. Which is like, yeah, wow. And of course we kind of push back, like, what do you mean it's stupid? This is coming from a guy who has worked his whole life and has been busy his whole life, all this kind of stuff. But here's a guy that at sort of the later stage of life and has sort of made it right and continues to sort of give advice and direction, but has found himself in his place. He has begun to think about life. In fact, he explains this whole idea that busy is the new stupid this way. He says, not having time to actually think about an issue, a challenge, or opportunity is a serious misstep on our path to success. And if you listen to this talk, he's simply saying this, that busy does not mean effective or productive, which we have a problem with because the problem is we feel like it is. Right? If I'm doing something, I must be doing something, right? I must be having some effect. I must be producing something. I must be kind of getting all this stuff. And the whole idea that he would talk about, not being busy and thinking. Thinking seems like a lot of work that doesn't look like work. Right? You're sitting at your desk. Bob, because your manager's always named Bob. Bob walks by. How's the project going? Great. What you doing? Thinking. That's just not going to fly. We look at it and we think, there's no way that Bob's buying that because there's no way we're buying it, right? But I appreciate this brilliance by William Buffett to recognize this and actually verbalize it. Because his point is, if we just keep working and never stop to think about things, not just think about how we can make the next million or how we can do this next thing or what's the thing or how to make this work a little better, but even to stop back and think if the thing we're working on is really worth working on. Yes. Are there some ways to rethink not just the business, but how the business impacts things? And could our busy at times be distracting us from what's really important? And the answer is, yeah, you don't need me to tell you that. We all know this intuitively, right? We all know it intuitively, even though we don't often stop to take care of the important pieces. So today we're going to go to a story from the life of Jesus, and it's recorded in the part of the Bible we call Luke. It's one of what we call the four Gospels, these stories about the life of Jesus. And Luke was not an eyewitness. I tell you this regularly because I want you to understand he was not an eyewitness to any of this stuff. He's sort of an investigative reporter that comes along later that goes and finds, he has some stories that the other, Mark and Matthew and John include, and he has some stories that nobody else includes. This is one of those stories that nobody else includes. And as we look at it, it's going to be, you kind of get done with it and think, that's kind of just a short thing, and I can see why they didn't include it, because it's kind of an uncomfortable story, and it's sort of, we kind of think, it's not kind of a big thing, and maybe that's why it made the cut for Luke and it didn't make the cut for everybody else. But it's the story. We're going to pick it up over in Luke chapter 10. And Luke, as he's writing it, says, here's this moment that Jesus and his followers, they're traveling, and they come into this town, this village. And when they get in the town, the village, there's a woman there named Martha, and she lets Jesus stay at her house. She received him is the language there. And we don't know from Luke's description whether, this is kind of a planned visit. Hey, I'm coming next week on Tuesday, or whether this is like, surprise, I'm here, or I just showed up in town and Martha knows some story about him and like, hey, come, you and the guys come stay at the house, we'll take care of everything. So she invites Jesus and the guys to stay with her, and Martha had a sister named Mary. So it's like, okay, there's two of them living here. And Luke tells us one other important thing about Mary, who was sitting at the Lord's feet and listened to him teach, listened to his message. Which you don't have to know anything else about the story to know, right? This sounds like it's not gonna go, because somebody shows up, she invites them to the house. Surely if somebody popped into your house, you're like, I gotta get stuff ready, gotta make a meal, get the bedrooms ready, get whatever the case is. And oh, by the way, I have a sister and she's just sitting. In fact, Luke says, he's kind of laid out the scene. This is the scene. Jesus shows up, the guy, she gets invited to the place, they're there, and oh, by the way, Mary has put herself in with Jesus' disciples, which Mary would have known, and Martha would have known, was not the normal. Because women should always know, good job, guys, I'm gonna give you a thumbs up. I'm gonna say it, but I'm saying it because back then and not today, they ought to know their place. Yeah, not my idea, cultural, historic moment, all right? But that would have been the idea. She should have known her place. That was to get things ready. Jesus' disciples were all the 12 that he called, right, were all guys. And so for her to go sit there, she's like stepping into a place that would have been out of the norm. But I love the fact that she goes and puts herself there. But she had to feel a little self-conscious, but maybe even the little bit of self-conscious was overshadowed by the fact that Jesus was there and she had a chance to sit and listen to him. Not just kind of in a crowd, but in this smaller circle. Amen. So it's this great picture of sort of, a change on culture and some stuff and going on. But let's get back to the story, because this is not going to go well. You don't have to be religious. You don't even have to know that you've ever read the story before. You already can know that this is not going to go well, right? Because it's like, I've invited this guy, I got a sister, and she's just sitting over there. So Luke says, hey, so that's the setting, but Martha was busy. She was worried. She was distracted. I love this word, distracted. Its literal language means to be pulled in different directions. And it actually comes from torture. Some of you may have read in history books, maybe seen movies, when they would take somebody and tie a horse to each limb. And then, send the horse in a different direction. You would literally be pulled apart, right? That's where this word comes from. It's a great picture, right? That she is busy. She's distracted. She's getting pulled in lots of different directions. And some of us know what that looks like, right? Because you got this going and you got that going and you got to get that ready, but you got to do this before you can do that. And you're just scrambling. You're just kind of busy because all the work, she's busy with, distracted with all the work that needs to be done, all the many preparations, because she's now invited at least 13 guys into her place, right? And the crazy thing is this, that Mary is frantically trying to get stuff ready. And Mary isn't. I just want you to let that sink in for a moment, right? Because I don't know about you, I kind of like Martha. Martha's my kind of person. I like somebody who's going to work like this. If you've ever had a group of employees or a staff that you've had to work with, and you had your choice between a Martha and a Mary, let's be honest, right? I'm taking the lady who's working her tail off, right? I don't want the one who's just sitting there. Tell me more. Oh, this is so. I want the one doing stuff. Let's be honest. But that's what frustrates Martha. She's getting pulled in all these different. She's working frantically, and Mary just is sitting there. And so Luke says there's something that happens. Martha kind of reaches her limit. She's been stretched. She's going all these different directions. She's trying to get the food. She's trying to get the room. She's trying to get everything kind of cleaned up. So she goes in, Luke tells us. She goes into where they're having their little meeting. And she says these words. Lord, don't you care? I'm going to say it how I think Martha would say it. But it's like, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me alone to do all the work? Sir, prepare the meal. Don't you care? And it's interesting. in this original language, she knows that Jesus cares, but she's looking for an ally at this moment. But even in that moment, she interprets the fact that Jesus isn't doing what she wants him to do as a sign that he doesn't care. We would never do anything like that, but that's where she was at. She was expecting Jesus to go, hey, Mary, it's great to have you part of the group today, but, I better go help Martha, right? Come back later, you can hang with us, but right now, But Jesus doesn't seem to be care. He's talking, she's eating it up, and it's all good, and she's like, hey. Don't you care? Don't you care about me? Don't you care about all the stress I'm under? Don't you care about all the stuff I'm having? Don't you care the fact that I invited you to my house and I need some help, and the one who's supposed to be helping me is like literally sitting right there, right? And here's the question I want us to just think about for a moment. What if Jesus cared more about Martha than she cared about herself? Because even those of us that are much like Martha, who love Marthas, know that Marthas tend to run at capacity. Actually, Marthas run regular capacity, oftentimes over capacity, right? And people like Martha don't always have the ability to pump the brakes, to slow things down, to say no. But in the process of living like that, it puts them in some really tough situations. So here's the picture. Martha has burst into the room. She said, Jesus, don't you care? Don't you care that my sister's left me all alone to do all this work? And then she ups the game. This is crazy what she says. Because remember, in that society, women knew their... Oh, guys, I was hoping you guys weren't going to... I hope just the women were going to say that. But I want you to keep that, right? Because here's what she tells Jesus. She's like, don't you care? So here's what I need you to do. I need you to step up your game, Jesus. I need you to tell her to help me. Which is like a wow moment because, again, that's a bad look in lots of different... The optics are just terrible in lots of ways, right? I mean, again, woman in that culture, that's breaking some protocols. But if she had been a guy to say that kind of stuff to Jesus, hey, don't you care that I'm working out here? Your job is to tell him to get in there and help me. Well, slow your roll. Who do you think you are, right? This is Jesus, right? But Martha has got to the spot. She is stressed, right? I mean, she's like stressed. She's getting all these directives. She is frustrated. You can hear it in the language, right? Don't you care that she's not helping me? Now, therefore, tell her to come help me, right? I need you to help me because she's not helping me. She is overwhelmed. And it makes sense. Even if you were planning for 13 guys to show up, that's a lot of people to have in your place. Especially what would have been a much smaller place than a lot of you live in. Not only was she overwhelmed, she was under-supported, right? And she felt underappreciated. And some of us right now are like, I understand Martha really well, right? Because that list is kind of like my life. I work full time, I come home, I got to get all the dinner ready, I got to do all this, I got to do all that. I got to get the kids here and then get them back here. I got to check, make sure they did their homework, and then they actually take their homework to school so they can turn it in. You go through this whole long list, right? I mean, that's the setting. It's at this moment, it's got to be uncomfortable in that room. I imagine the guys are like, what do we do? It's like, we never heard anybody say stuff like this to Jesus. I mean, telling him what to do, that's kind of his job, right? And then I love Jesus' answer. Luke says, here's what he said. He says, Martha, Martha. If you're from the South, bless your heart. Martha, Martha, you are just worried. You're anxious and upset about many things. I mean, Martha, I understand. You got a lot going on, right? And I understand you're upset. He's trying to validate. Let me just understand if I hear this right. You have a lot of work to do and nobody's helping. I mean, it's that kind of piece, right? Here's the great thing. She's bothered, and that's what bothers Jesus. The fact that she's worked out. I don't think Jesus is bemoaning the fact that things have to get done. I don't think he's putting her down because let's be honest, things have to get done. I mean, they have to eat, they have to have, some place to stay. I don't know if the guys would have helped or not. I don't know in that culture if that would have been a thing. But Jesus isn't so much about what needs to be done. What he's bothered about is how it's bothering her. Bothered her to the degree that she would make such a big deal out of it that she would call Jesus out to step in and try to fix this thing between her and her sister. Because notice what Jesus says after. He says, Martha, Martha, I understand you're worked up over a lot of stuff. I get it. But Martha, only one thing is important. Only one thing is necessary or needed. Only one thing. I know you got like 20 things right now, and you could probably think of another 5 things that if you have time, you're going to get to them. But in this moment, there's just one thing. Because I have to imagine that when Martha burst into the room, because I imagine, though it didn't say she burst in the room, I imagine she made her presence known when she walked in that room. I mean, I don't picture her walking in like, Jesus, can I say something real quietly? I see her kind of walking in, hand on the hip, right? Right? Get this thing straight, get this fixed up. And I have to imagine Mary is like, oh no, right? Because she's down sitting at Jesus' feet. She's down on the ground, which was the position of disciples back then. You kneeled to the feet of your rabbi. And it wasn't just about learning. It was about wanting to imitate them, model them, know kind of how they were thinking, begin to try to live your life like they were. So she's down there and she's ought to be like, I imagine she begins to step up. Because it's like, my sister's making a scene. I have to imagine it's not the first scene that Martha's ever made. Just saying. But I have to imagine Mary's kind of like starting to get up and kind of go, and Jesus is like, there's only one thing that's important, Martha. And oh, by the way, Martha, Mary has chosen the better thing. Which had to put Martha on her heels, right? Because she's like got to be like, what? Better thing? Have you had my fried chicken before, But this is the better. Jesus is saying something real important. He's saying, listen, she's chosen the better thing. Not saying your stuff was bad. Your stuff could have been good. Really good. But she's chosen something better. And it will never be taken away from her. And I have to imagine Jesus, like I said, kind of sit down and stay there. To put it another way, I think Jesus is saying this. I care about you. But I don't care about what you care about right now. See, you're making this a thing and missing that there may be another thing. Something that's more important than what's important to you. Which always stings a little bit, doesn't it? When the things that are important to us and we think should be important to somebody else and it isn't. And Martha's problem at this moment is, it isn't to Jesus. She knew it wasn't to her sister, but the fact that it wasn't to Jesus. See, the problem isn't what's happening in the house, but what's happening in Martha's head. It's the stories we tell ourselves. And we all do this, right? We have a set of what we think are facts in front of us. And without some counterfacts or some explanations, we begin to make a story. And our story gets added to by how we're feeling in the moment. And if we're stressed, if we're distracted, pulled in all these different directions, if we're overwhelmed and understaffed and underappreciated, all that stuff begins to be part of that story, right? It may even get us to the point like Martha where you're a little ticked off at Jesus. Because Jesus should have known better. You almost get that sense when she says this, right? That Jesus should have known that this is my sister and kind of her job and my job is kind of get stuff ready, not to be just sitting at your stupid feet, right? She had to be up doing something. And sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves come from our sense of obligation. Some of us have that naturally. Some of us, that was what was put into us as kids. Some of it we've seen modeled from other people. Sometimes there's a sense of obligation that somebody needs to do it, and if nobody else will do it, I'm going to do it, right? Because it needs to get done. But it's not just our sense of obligation, it's also our sense of value and worth. Because some of us, let's be honest, some of us like it when people know we're busy. Because if we're busy, we're important. And that's the story we tell ourselves. And that's how we find our value. We find our value in doing, because doing is something we can show. Look at what I cooked. Look at what I put together. Look at what I designed. Look at what I did. And in the midst of that, we find our value and our worth in all of that. And part of the stories we tell ourselves are based on the fact that some of us don't believe, we don't think we're worthy enough on our own. That we really are what we produce. And if we're not producing, then we're not worth anything. And so if this is kind of sounds like you, and if somebody's kind of giving you the side eye right about now, like hopefully no elbows, but just kind of giving you that look, right? Here's what happens. So we do. That's our go-to, right? We feel like value and worth, our obligation, all those things. We've got the story that's going on, how we're telling ourselves. So we do. We do for others. Which, by the way, you are loved and appreciated by lots of people. Because we need people to do stuff for others. We do stuff for God. And sometimes in situations and spaces like this, and people like me will say things about, how important, and we kind of play up that whole thing, right? That if you're going to be faithful to Jesus, you need to serve. You need to do this, you need to do that. You need to do more and more and more. Did you know that Jesus never told us we needed to be busy? I talked about working when it was light, because when the dark comes, we can't work. So there's a time to work and there's a time not to work. But he never was this idea, we got to be busy, we got to finish all this stuff. It's all up to us. See, we've gotten this idea that it's up to us. So we do. We do for others, we do for God. But here's my question, what about us, for us? And some of us say, I don't need anything for me. I'm glad to just serve. That's where I find my meaning, my thing, and that may be true. And again, I appreciate people that are Marthas. I'm being honest, I get frustrated at Marys. Because here's what happens. Martha says, I've got to. Right? I've got to. And Jesus says, do you really? He says, listen, you're running around doing all of this stuff, right? While we're here to be with you. I mean, Martha, you invited us into your home so we could be together. Mary's being together. You, not so much. Because you're distracted with many things, right? You're pulled in all these different directions, and I understand it. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, didn't you invite us here to be with you? I mean, because Martha was concerned about a lot. But that a lot was too much according to Jesus. See, she thought the moment was about getting everything right when it was just about the moment. And I've talked to you about this before. I got lots of regrets in life. And one of them is in my parenting, that early on, that I didn't take the moments that I should have taken with my kids. And there's a reason for that. I have a good reason. I'm a pastor. I'm a man of God who lots of people, want and need me, have me around. And so if there's a meeting going on, or I got to go do this or that, that's the most important, because not only is that what I get paid to do, but that's what people are expecting me to do and counting on me to do. And the bad part was, sadly, and I'm admitting this openly, I missed too many moments. Because I thought it was about getting everything right. And so often it was just about the moment. Because here's what I have discovered in life. Rarely do those moments come when you've planned for them. You're trying to get everything just right, and you hope everything kind of goes off right because you want it all to look good. But most of the best moments in my life, the moments that have had the biggest impact, the moments that have provided opportunities, the moments that have gotten, had told some story that has impacted somebody else's life or my own life, have just happened in moments that in that moment I was present. I think author and pastor Andy Stanley captures this brilliantly in this one statement. He says, the things we get distracted by are never as important as the things we get distracted from. And the truth is, no one likes to hear that the things we think are important aren't. Right? But here's the truth. Sometimes they aren't. And that's hard to hear, but isn't that important to hear? Wouldn't it be good to know that the things that we think sometimes are so important aren't as important as we think they are? Because maybe in that process of understanding they aren't as important, maybe helps us rethink about how important these are. And again, I don't think Jesus is saying, here's what I want, Martha. I want you to come here, sit down with Mary, and just sit at our feet and don't do anything the rest of the day. In fact, don't do anything the rest of the time we're here with you. In fact, when we leave, I just want you to sit in this spot because I've been in this spot. I just want you to sit here every day and go, this is the spot Jesus was. And I'm just going to stay here night and day and stay here. Jesus is not talking about that. See, Martha was being helpful, but not present. And Martha was so distracted preparing for Jesus' visit that she forgot the most important thing, which simply was being with Jesus. And here's the thing I know that's true for a lot of us. The choice between good and better is tough. Because there's lots of good stuff to do. A lot of needed stuff that needs to get done, right? And somehow figuring out that's the stuff, that's the good stuff. That's the stuff that provides a roof over your head. It provides a car for you to drive, food on the table, provides for whatever, all those kinds of things. It doesn't mean picking the better is always picking the better, and that's better all the time. But there are moments when there is something that's better. See, for conscientious people, those choices are often the most difficult and anxiety-filled. Trying to figure out which one's good and better, right? Because good kind of is good. And if it's good, we ought to do it, right? And there's another part to it that makes it hard. Let's just be honest. Sitting seems like a waste of time. Doesn't it? Because what can you do when you sit? And here's the great thing. And the thing I think sometimes we miss when we look at this picture from Jesus' life. Jesus isn't condemning what Martha's doing as much as he's commending Mary's choice. See, I've been a little hard on Martha because Jesus was a little hard on Martha, but I don't think he was trying to be hard on her and condemning all the stuff that she's doing. What he's saying is he's contrasting her to what Mary chose to do. And saying that's the commendable thing. Not that she's leaving all the work to you, but she's not missing the moment. Because Martha, moments come and moments go. And tomorrow or the next few days or whenever, they leave town, the moment's gone. See, what if it's not about sitting and doing nothing, but sitting and being? And here's the props I want to give all of you today. all of you in this moment, while you've been here at church, have been following Mary's example. Thank you, yes. You guys ought to be happy about that. You're the one that Jesus is like, this is the way you ought to do it, right? But we all kind of, a lot of us like Martha, are like, yeah, you know, it's good, but, right? But it's one of the benefits of this whole idea of taking some time away, right? The whole idea of Sabbath, and we kind of figure that piece out. But even just this idea of spending some time together, right? Of singing. And I've told you before that one of the reasons we sing a lot of songs is that sometimes it takes us a while to get to the place where we're open to God. Sometimes it takes a place to convince ourselves of some things. And so we sing those things that sometimes because we believe, and sometimes it's just kind of to get us to that place, right? And sometimes we need a place like this that's different from the place you're going to go to when you leave here. That has lots of different demands and expectations. But just sitting and listening, and no, I'm not equating myself to Jesus, even though you are sitting at my feet. But just this idea that to be willing to take some time away from all the demands that all of us have. Things that can seem more important, but according to Jesus, maybe aren't more important. To simply let the moment be the moment. And not have to worry about all the other stuff, but just to kind of try to be fully in that moment. Because sometimes what's important for us doesn't align with what seems important to us. And it's in those moments that we need to pause. Because pausing is more than just, every seventh day stopping and taking away, not working, not buying and selling. That's kind of the whole biblical description there. Or also not lighting fires, which is a whole other piece we want to really talk about. But it's more than that. It's not about just trying every 7 days to kind of take a little break and get in a space like this. It's also about how we go through life. Not letting busy become stupid for us, as Warren Buffett talked about. So let me offer you three steps to do that. And the first one's this. Everybody say stop. One of the best things we can do, and I've been trying to practice for the last probably couple of years, because as soon as I leave the house, I'm on task, right? And I'm going and I'm thinking, I got the radio on, and I got my phone out, not looking at it while I drive. But I'm going, right? And I've tried to slow myself down. I've tried to stop as I make my way out my front door to my car and just stop for a moment to look and to listen. Because in those moments, at least at my house, I stop and I look and I get to see kind of what's going on around the neighborhood. But it's not just seeing what my neighbors are doing. It's just sort of kind of look. I live around a bunch of trees, so it's kind of nice to hear trees. I hear the birds, which I would not hear if I didn't stop to listen for them. And maybe that's the thing that I would encourage you as you leave here today. Maybe to develop those 3 steps in life. Maybe just for this next week, to when you can think of it, when you can catch yourself, to stop, to look, and to listen, and to see if in that very simple, basic 3-step process, maybe you'll discover a moment that you wouldn't have noticed if you hadn't stopped, if you hadn't looked, and you hadn't listened.